welcome to you all to the last day of Rights and Reason in Africana Studies. I want to begin by paying a special welcome to our two poets, Esther Phillips and Evans. Girls from the Caribbean and Africa. I want to say how this all came about because I think it's important. Last semester, there we go. Last semester, there was a course, graduate course, initiated by our graduate students in Africana Studies. I see Shamara here. I'm not sure anybody else. Initiated by our graduate students, which included students from graduate students from literary arts as well as from theater and performance studies. And the course which they initiated and which I taught was on Caribbean female novelists. So it was a course on Caribbean literature, but with a focus on Caribbean female writers, and not only novelists, we actually did poets, and particularly Esther's poetry, and also some female poets from Puerto Rico. And as we were doing this course, the students began to talk about Caribbean literature. And the idea emerged that we should have a Caribbean evening, afternoon, day, in which we invited some of the persons who we studied to come to Brown. Esther Phillips, during that course, appeared on Skype. As we studied the Stone Gatherer, and we spent time talking to her in what I think was a very fascinating conversation about that remarkable volume of poetry, poems, and about her work and about Caribbean literature in general. So I want to begin there because that's how this really has come about. In other words, the seed was generated from a group of graduate students, all female graduate students from this department, as well as literary arts and theater and performance studies, about trying to have a function like this. So I want to welcome you all on behalf of Africana Studies, and also on behalf of the project, the African and African Diaspora Knowledges Project, which is a project in the Africana Studies Department, which attempts to think about Africa and African diasporic knowledge and all its complexities in a cutting-edge way, really pushing against the conventional boundaries and ways in which we think about some of these things through disciplinary protocols. My job here tonight is to welcome you and to introduce the Chair of Africana Studies, Brian Meeks, and then also to introduce Esther. So let me introduce Professor Meeks. Professor Meeks is by training a political scientist, comparative political scientist, and that specializes in questions of social and political change, writing first on issues about the revolution. His first major book was a comparative book about Grenadian, Cuban, and Nicaraguan revolutions. But that is what I like to call his academic clothing. The Brian Meeks that I knew was a Brian Meeks who first wrote poetry and played the flute and beat drums, right? And I just found out once he came here, something I didn't know was an abandoned JC, Jamaica College in Kingston. But Brian Meeks, I first knew of Brian Meeks as a poet. And he's a published poet. He has a poem that was published in the Carrie Festa volume, which actually, I would say to him, emerged came up in a meeting in of all places, Arts and Science Academies of Belgium on Tuesday, when we were discussing CARIFESTA and whether or not we needed to actually have a volume on CARIFESTA itself, and your point came up in that meeting. So Professor Beeks is the current chair of Africana Studies, is a political scientist, he's a poet, and he's also a novelist. His novel Pinkerton Red is one of the very first novels, not one of, is the very first novel I know of to begin to discuss Jamaica in the 1970s. And there was another novelist who was just won a major prize, who was written about that particular period. So I really would like to say that Africana Studies welcomes Professor Beeks. He already felt the difference in his chairmanship of the department, and I hope that he will write some more poems. So, Brian.
Tony, you can't call me a poet in front of Kwame Dawes. Because I'm ashamed that when I look at my limited production and what these far more accomplished colleagues have done, my job here is to introduce Kwame Dawes, and it is a privilege. We went to the same school, and in the Caribbean, that is a big deal. So that is the least of his accomplishments. When I went on the web, not on the web, in fact, his agent told me I needed to go on the web to find his bio, his short bio. I went and it was perhaps 4 pages long. So I had to edit his short bio, and forgive me if I leave off bits and pieces here and there. But Kwame's work has been extraordinary. He was born in Ghana in 1962, but spent most of his childhood and early adult life in Jamaica. He's a writer of poetry, and there's a story behind that, but that's Kwame's story. He's a writer of poetry, fiction, non-fiction, and plays. As a poet, he is profoundly influenced by the rhythms and textures of Jamaica, citing in an interview his quote, "spiritual, intellectual, and emotional engagement with reggae music." Indeed, his book, Bob Marley, Lyrical Genius, remains the most authoritative study of the lyrics of Bob Marley. Of his 16 collections of poetry, his most recent titles include Duppy Conqueror, 2013, shortlisted for the PEN Open Book Award, Wheels, 2011, Back of Mount Peace, 2009, Hope's Hospice, 2009, Wisteria, finalist for the Patterson Memorial Prize, Impossible Flying, 2007, and Goma's Song, 2007. Progeny of Air of 1994 was the winner of the Forward Poetry Prize for the best first collection in the United Kingdom. His book, Midland, was awarded the Holly Summers Poetry Prize by the Ohio Press, University Press 2001, and Dawes was a winner of a Pushcart Prize for the Best American Poetry of 2001 for his long poem, Inheritance. His next collection, City of Bones, is due in fall 2016. Kwame Dawes has published 2 novels, Bivouac, 2009, and She's Gone, 2007. Where does he find the time? Winner of the 2008 Hurston Wright Legacy Award for Best First Novel. In 2007, he released A Far Cry from Plymouth Rock, a personal narrative. And I personally urge anyone interested in the questions of nationality and its complications, particularly to do with issues associated with the immigration line, to read Kwame Dawes' Far Cry from Plymouth Rock, a personal narrative. In 2009, Dawes won an Emmy for LiveHopeLove.com an interactive site based on his Pulitzer Center project, Hope, Living and Loving with AIDS in Jamaica. It has also won other accolades, including a People's Voice Webby Award, and was the inspiration for the music spoke word performance, Wisteria and Hope, which premiered at the National Black Theatre Festival in North Carolina. I continue. Dawes is an actor, playwright, and producer, an accomplished storyteller, broadcaster, and was the lead singer in Ujamaa, a reggae band. 15 of his plays have been produced, and he has acted in, directed, or produced several of these productions himself. Most recently, One Love at the Lyric Hammersmith in London. Until July 2011, Dawes was Distinguished Poet in Residence, Louis Fry Scudder Professor of Liberal Arts, and founder and executive director of the South Carolina Poetry Initiative. He was the director of the University of South Carolina Arts Institute and is the programming director of the Calabash International Literary Festival, which takes place in Jamaica in May of each year. His co-conspirator for that festival, Colin China, isn't here yet. I hope he turns up shortly. He lives in Providence, his friend Colin China. Dawes is currently the Glenna Lushai editor of Prairie Schooner at the University of Nebraska, where he's Chancellor's Professor of English. And I must add that Kwame has been involved in a new initiative to publish young African poets. Watch this space. It is a fantastic collection of new African poets, which comes out annually, Kwame, in a package of beautifully published small editions. This initiative, I think, may very well, if it is even at all possible, throw all his previous work into the shade. But it is certainly a fantastic initiative. I could go on, but I welcome now to read from his work, a remarkable artist, an outstanding scholar, Professor Kwame Dawes.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks, Tony. So I'm here largely to support Esther Phillips, whose book will be launched while we're here this week. Her new book, Leaving Atlantis, which is a beautiful and a stunning book. So it's great to be sharing the stage with her and to be reading with her. I'll read a few poems and then I'll stop. And hopefully after Esther is read, we'll just have a little Q&A. We could just answer a few questions if you have them or not. We'll just sit down and look pretty. There's great light up here, so you can just watch us. There's an old sort of folk hymn that I thought I would start with from Jamaica. Touch my finger on the golden pen, the golden pen, golden pen. You fit touch my finger on the golden pen and write my name up there. I'll start with a poem by Kofi Awona, uncle, relative of mine, who was killed a couple of years ago in Kenya. And for most of the readings I do, I just read this little small poem by him. He was killed in that terrorist attack that took place in Kenya a few years ago. Counting the years. As usual, in the earlier dreams, I come to the whistling shores. The voice of the high-domed crab stilled, but a chorus remains of the water creatures of earlier times, of the birth time and the dying time, the pity when we resurrect the travelers, the anchorman on our singular boat that will take us home. Progeny of air. The propellers undress the sea, the pattern of foam like a broken zip opening where the bow cuts the wave and closes in its wake. The seals bark, gulls call and dive, then soar loaded with catch. The smell of rotting salmon lingers over the Bay of Fundy like a mortuary's disinfected air. Fish farms litter the coastline. Metal islands cultivating with scientific precision these gray, black, pink-fleshed fish. In the old days, salmon would leap up the river to spawn, journeying against the current. They are travelers. When tucked too low, searching for undertows to rest upon, they often scrape their bellies on the sharp adze and bleed. Now watch them turn and turn in the cages, waiting for the feed of colorized herring to spit from the silver computer bins over the islands of sea farms. And General, the hugest of the salmon, has a square nose where a seal chewed on a super freeze winter night when her blood panicked and almost froze. Jean-Pierre, the sea cage guard and technician, thinks they should roast the General in onions and fresh sea water. It is hard to read mercy in his stare and matter-of-factly way. He wears layers, fisherman's uniform passed from generation to generation, the plaid shirt, the stained yellow jacket, the ripped olive green boots, the black slap trousers with holes, the whiskers, and eye of sparkle as if salt sea has crystallized on his sharp cornea. He guides the boat in, spills us out after our visit with a grunt and a grin, willing us to wet our sneakers at the water's edge. The sun blazes through the chill, the motor stutters, the sea parts, and then zips shut and still. Stunned by their own intake of poison, the salmon turn belly up on the surface, then sucked up by the plastic piscolator, they plop limp and gasping in the sunlight. One by one, the glove technician press with their thumbs the underside of the fish, spilling the eggs into tiny cups destined for the hatchery. Anesthetized eyes glaze shock on the steel deck. They know the males from the females, always keep them apart, never let seed touch egg, never let the wind carry the smell of birthing through the June air. Unburdened now, the fish are flung back in. They twitch, then, tentative as hungover denizens of nightmares, they swim the old Sisyphean orbit of their tiny cosmos. The fish try to spawn at night, but only fart bubbles and herring. On the beach, the rank saltiness of murdered salmon is thick in the air. Brown seaweed sucks up the blood. The beach is a construction site of huge cement blocks which moor the sea cages when tossed 80 feet down. They sink into the muddy floor of the bay and stick. There is no way out of this prison for the salmon. They spin and spin in the algae green netting, perpetually caught in limbo, waiting for years before being drawn up and slaughtered, steaked and stewed. And in the morning silence, the sun is turning over for a last doze. And silver startles the placid ocean against the gray-green of Dare Island. The salmon leaps in a magical arc, slaps the metal wave in a bounce, and then dives, cutting the chilled water on the other side. Swimming is General, this is my fantasy. With a square nose and skin gone pink with seal bites, escaping from this wall of nets and weeds, General swims upriver alone, leaping the current with her empty womb, leaping, still instinct, still traveling to the edge of Lake Utopia, where, after so many journeyings, after abandoning this secure world of spawning and living at the delicate hands of technicians, after denying herself social security and the predictability of a steady feeding and the safety from predator seal and osprey, after enacting the Sisyphean pattern of all fish here in the shadow of the Connors sardine factory, she spawns her progeny of air and dies. Some years ago, I did some work with the BBC in Ethiopia. I was interviewing folks in Ethiopia and in England about Haile Selassie, really looking at his time of exile in Bath, England. But it took me to Ethiopia. And one of the places I visited was Shashamani, and I met a man called Solomon Ephraim Wolf. Just this evening we were talking about the Jamaicans who made the trip to Africa, their repatriation to Africa, and some of the challenges they faced. Solomon was one such man who took advantage of what Selassie offered, which was land that people of the African diaspora could come and settle with the single proviso that they were. So I was interviewing him, and I asked him a question which prompted this poem. The poem is called African Postman. Son, who is that? Is the African postman daddy? Burning Spear. East from Addis Ababa and then south deep into the Rift Valley. I can hear the horns trumpeting over the flat-roofed acacia trees. See the African women bend low with wood heavy on their backs, and the cows, goats, donkeys, mules, sheep, and horses snapped into obedient herds by sprinting children move along the roadside. Life happens here. I'm traveling to the land I have heard about, Shashamane, the green place, 500 acres of jazz benevolence, and I know now that I long to hear the rootsman tell me how, despite rumors of his passing, the Nati keeps on riding, keeps on standing in the fields of praise to hold on to the faith of roots people. Brother Solomon, you put the name Ephraim on your head and carry the face of the true Rasta, the face of an Ashanti warrior, eyes deep under heavy lids and your skin tight as leather, blacker than black. I have met you before on the streets of Kingston, there where you trod to the hiss and slander of the heathen, you, Natty Dread, gathering the people's broken minds into your calabash. You carry it all, tell them, return to the roots, the healing shall take place. You are Burning Spear's voice in the fields of Teph. You tell me of the prophecy of Marcus, and I listen to you through the phlegm, through the gruff of your voice, and suddenly when I ask about the passing of the emperor, you rise up like a staff of correction, your voice reaching back to the mountains, your warrior self, your yardman greatness, and you speak a mystery of those who have ears but won't hear, and those who have eyes and won't see. And I know that this dread will one day stand in this soil and find his feet growing roots, that soon the earth will be darker for the arrival of Solomon. Oh, let the heathen rage, let the doubters scoff, let this Ghanaian youth whose eyes have seen the face of Jesus Christ, let him too sit and marvel at the faith of the Nati. For this African postman has forsaken father and mother and has come to stand before his imperial majesty to call only him father, so that the father might call him son. And the world will carry on its weary march, and the ibises will swoop in the Ethiopian dusk, and the smoke will rise from the wood fires, and the night will come with the news that the rootsman, after 400 years of being told he's homeless, has come home. Yes, Jah, has come home. Sons and daughters of His Imperial Majesty, Haile Selassie, earth rightful ruler, without any apologies there. This is the time when I will come home. Yes, Jah, will come home before. Nale, nale, nale. I lived in South Carolina for about 19 years, and to be honest with you, I owe that state a great debt. Every book that I've written and published was written in that state and out of my experience there. Well, except the one coming out next year, which started there. It's a poem called How to Pick a Hanging Tree. Pastoral scene of the gallant south, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolias, sweet and fresh, and the sudden smell of burning flesh. Lewis Allen. Young trees may look sturdy, but they have no memory. They're green, so near the surface they bend with a sudden weight. And the truth is that not all trees can carry a man's dead weight with enough air between pointed toes and earth, with enough height so the scent of rotting can carry far enough to be a message for those who are sniffing the muggy air for news. Old as it may look, craggy bark, twisted branches, drooping limbs, old as it may seem, sitting there by the edge of the canal, that live oak understands the simple rituals of hanging. See, there is the natural notch where the rope will slip and hold, and here, angled like this, the damp air of the river carries the decay for miles and miles. Sometimes a fresh tree will simply die after the piss of a dying man seeps into its roots. Sometimes a tree will start to rot from guilt or something like a curse. But the old trees, seasoned by the flame of summer lightning and hardened to tears, know it is nothing to be a tree, mute and heartless, just strong enough to carry a man until he turns to air. It's a poem called Rope for August Wilson, after August Wilson, who I think is just one of the most important writers that the United States has produced. And we are still learning to understand just the monumental contribution that he's made to the poetic imagination. So this is a poem called Rope. I'll read the last lines first and then read the poem. Someday, a soul will come out of the fields to claim it, and then we will know. Someday, a soul will come out of the fields to claim it, and then we will know. To hold our lives together on the cart, before the slow march after midnight, along back roads, blind, driving, the scent of the exhaust making us drowsy, every shadow in the fields a threat of sorts. We use rope thick as two thumbs side by side, pulling hard on the knot to keep our paths from falling by the wayside. We have kept this rope supple with oil, constant use, never letting it stay idle long enough to rot. It is hard to look at the coiled silence of our strongest rope and not think of what it has held. The heavy gray-green battered bucket knocking the stone sides of the wall. Top water spilling back down, this cherished substance carrying our lives. The mare, white and gray, plodding across the wide open field at dusk, her head heavy with labor. The rope a caress against her neck. The way she turns towards a gentle tuck. We hold the balance of our need in this rope. The dead weight of June bug at dawn. His skin still steaming, his beautiful black skin catching the morning light, tender among the leaves. How we found him there, his neck stretched, the wrapping of several yards of taut rope around the drooping branch where we found it. How we undid the knot, let his body down into our arms, then carried it like a soldier's flag, bearing it behind the cart, shaking along with his swollen body. This ordinary rope, this gift we cannot forget, this remembrance of what we have lost. Someday, a soul will come out of the fields to claim it, and then we will know. A few more poems. if you know her. I tend to do this a lot, if you've heard me read, but if I read this poem, I have to point out that this is not a poem about my wife. It may appear that way to you, but it isn't at all. And in any event, if you meet her and you ask, don't ask her about it as if it's about her. It's not about, all right? Just to be very clear, this is a fictionalized, and I have to also point out that having said that, now I have the problem of explaining who it is about. Well, it's just a poem made up in my imaginative splendor. But all we could say it's based on a character from a book. However, I could not write the poem. I want us to be clear about this. However, I admit I couldn't write the poem if I didn't know my wife. But it's not about her, per se. Not even per se. You see, when I say per se, then you're going to start thinking maybe kind of like, but it's not. It's just like, it's generic, but specific in very complicated ways. Okay, so here goes. If you know her. If you know your woman, know her rhythms, know her ways. If you're paying attention to her all these years, you will know how she comes and goes, how she slips away, even though she's standing in the same place. You'll know that her world is drifting softly from you. And she may not mean it, because all it is she is scared to be everything. Scared to be finding herself in you every time. Scared that one day she will ask herself, all 40 plenty years of her, where she's been. If you know your woman, you will know that mostly she will come back, but sometimes when she drifts like this, something can make her slip, and then coming back is hard. If you know your woman, you can tell by the way she puts on heels and she does not sashay for you, because it's not about you. How she will buy some leather boots and not say a word about it, and you only see it when she walks in one night and she says she's had them forever. And you will see the way she loses the weight and pretend it's nothing, but when she isn't seeing you looking, you can see how she faces the mirror, lifts her chest to catch a profile, and how she casually looks at her ass for signs of life. If you know your woman, when you're gone, she will find things to do like walk alone, go see a movie, find a park, collect her secrets, and you won't know because she's looking for herself. And she won't tell you that she wants to hear what idle men say when she walks by them, because what you say is not enough. If you know your woman, you know when she's going away, and you will feel the big hole of your love, and you can't tell why she's listening and humming to tunes you did not know she's heard before, and she will laugh softly at nothing at all. If you know your woman, you will see how she comes and goes, and all you can do is wait and pray she will come back to you, because you know that your sins are enough for her to leave and not return. I'm sure a woman started that applause. Yeah. Two more poems and then I'll be done. Now this is a poem for my wife. This is like officially. It says here for Lorna. It's like written. So this is for her. There's this thunder egg. The poem is called Egg on the Teacup. Egg on the Teacup. For Lorna. 1. Perhaps I should have asked your father for your hand, and perhaps he should have said no, just to show us he could. Then we would not wonder if it mattered at all to him. We might not have felt so on our own. 2. They never made it to your wedding. A cousin had one too, and they had to go, they said, and did. And you, they thought, could take it. And we, they thought, could handle it. So we did. He may not have meant to, but he taught me not to fear your body broken, really. But you were strong, weren't you? It takes years to learn how much you long to be the fragile one, the delicate vessel. 3. This was my betrayal to think you could take it, while I cupped the fragile catastrophes of others. For my vanity and the lie of misplaced care, forgive me, forgive me. I'm learning the language of husbandry, how to tend beauty, to listen to the power of a broken thing, a cup, some china, almost transparent, 2 broken pieces in a bed of soil, gleaming. 4. Not that you never tried before, I simply chose to read it as your stoic way, you binging on a box of jelly-filled donuts, devoured in front of me and always followed by the coolness of insouciant accusation and firm pushback. Alone you would command, and I fled. You tested me so often, and I failed you. Still, you gave me an open door as if you thought your test too hard, too advanced for me. How we compromise for love, how we survive. I'm grateful for those vivas retesting inside our hot house, my hands learning to caress. 5. You did not hesitate, I know, to face the violence of cancer. It looked as if the body could at last show me your wounded self, and I would see how tenderly you wanted me to touch you inside, far inside. So it was not the fear of death, nothing like that, just the knowledge of how it is written that these things hidden in the dark will be revealed. I see you now, I hold you gingerly, I will learn you, I will. And 6, harder than a stone, but more fragile than an egg, as if in the dark of youth one can tell them apart, the egg from the thunder egg. And I'll end with a poem called In This Saying, and it's a poem about endings in some ways. They're good endings, and they're not so good endings, and hopefully this is a good ending. So, in this saying, 1. There is a way to end books, the gathered papers, their weighty gift, the clean parade of words in columns of paragraphs and in columns of images, the tidiness of things. And numbered, they form the thing you have labored over for years. To end a book, you tie a blue ribbon around the heft, make a bow, kiss it. 2. The way to end the year of cataclysms is to find a piece of land by water where old boats rot at the edges. And the place smells of ancient things, sulfur, salt, rotting fish, and the deep musk of mud and grass. To then sit on a moving jetty, rocking against the universe's pulse, and there wait for the moon. 3. To end this way alone is to end with the hollow melancholy of loss and regret. Better to end with the voice of your woman, for you will need that voice ordinary as rain talking your name. Perhaps it is the intrusion of her scent filling the air, or the cool of her touch slick with tomato pulp and herbs. 4. I know the gender of this poem, do not worry, it is because I know the name of the bodies standing in the dusk by water, Kwame and Lorna. They will hold hands, and in this saying, the poem ends. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kwame. Esther Phillips is a Barbadian poet. She won the James Michener Fellowship at the University of Miami, where she did a master's in creative writing. She is the winner of the Alfred Boas Poetry Prize of the American Academy of Poets for her poetry collections, and has gone on to win the Frank Collymore Literary Endowment Award in 2001. She has read her work at various festivals, including the one that Colin and Kwame organized in Calabash. And she has also organized the Bill Literary Festival and Book Fair in Barbados. And she's the editor of perhaps, in my view, one of the most important literary journals in the Caribbean, BIM. Those of you who don't know, BIM was started in the 1940s in Barbados. It was then taken over by Frank Collymore, and then Esther and others resuscitated that journal, and it remains, in my view, one of the most important literary journals in the Anglophone Caribbean. Esther Phillips speaks in a poetic imagination, in registers of our own interiority. It is a poetic imagination which moves from describing and feeling ordinary life in Barbados and in the Caribbean to the complexities of living in that region in the Caribbean. Her poems give us a profound sense of the Caribbean. And she has a certain kind of voice. A voice, in my view, which sometimes catches us unaware, but then as we listen, deeply touches us, and sometimes touches us in startling ways. Her poems, therefore, in my view, are statements. Statements about a certain kind of interiority, a certain kind of Caribbeanness. And therefore, she represents, in my view, a distinct voice about living in the Caribbean as a woman. Esther Phillips.
Thank you, Professor Bowles, Professor Meeks. Thank you for inviting me to read, and thank you for coming. The first two poems do in fact have very much to do with the Caribbean, in the sense that the absent father is a continuing theme. And in this poem, I am visiting my father, who would have left Barbados for many years, and my sister and I are sitting in his apartment, having come back in contact with him after many, many years. Mask. Until my sister, ever tactless, said, "You're assuming that you're a great man." And the words fled from the room, dodged the mad wheels of summer motorcyclists, slapped the flags hoisted for the Labor Day parade, ripped bunting from storefronts, skinned like a skate up the Hudson, slid past the currents threatening to swallow them up, howled like a skinned, salted hag over the Brooklyn Bridge, rose higher, higher, wailing, drumming on windows no one would open. And I, who'd helped him dream this greatness, could not speak, while his thick fingers stretched the accordion out like long-lost years. And he, pretending not to hear my sister's words, spoke on. Brooding in every corner of the room, the lumbering shadow formed itself into a question. Why? Why this? What way to reconcile my father, proud, erect, dressed in his well-pressed suits, keeping his Cadillac in mint condition? What way to understand the squalor he returned to every day? No words, she said. There are no words that can describe the horror. No wonder he has kept us out. He finished his stories of illustrious men, their deprivations, great deeds they'd left behind them. He played his final favorite hymn, finding the notes by instinct as it seemed. Now the day is over, night is drawing nigh, shadows of the evening steal across the sky. How often had he looked into the shapes behind the shadows? How often had he seen among whatever demons haunted him his children, whom he said he loved and left so many years ago? Perhaps for him, another kind of greatness, to straddle two opposing worlds and find some foothold, to gaze into the heart of his own darkness, square his shoulders and walk on, never to say, this punishment is more than I can bear. Sitting this summer evening in this Brooklyn room my sister labored to restore, what does it matter now? We look behind the mask and choose to love him still. This other poem, Legacy, is now the mother who's left with the children. And one of the memories I always have of my mother is having her sit and play the piano. Legacy. My mother's touch was not tender. Everything was fortissimo. She made no gentle overtures, slipping with graceful ease onto a polished stool. A cane-bottomed chair held her full weight. Hers were not long, tapering fingers slightly curved to show the artistic mind. Her fingers were short and thick, broken nails sheltering bits of earth. I knew by the set of her jaw and the sad aura around her. It was not just the piano my mother played. A score was more like something she needed to settle. A mere slip and a chord could betray her. And the way she sang in her kind of larghetto, oh my darling Clementine, thou art lost and gone forever, dreadful sorry Clementine. Her farewell to a girl who'd gone too soon. Now, husbanding her crop of children, she wrested from a trap of horizontal spaces what melody she could. Years later, in an unyielding season, and far away from home, I listened for the slightly out-of-tune piano, and see her as I did not then, seed mother, beginner of life, of art. Out of the cumber she bore painter, dancer, poet. Her sad songs lured us into feeling, for word, image, rhythm to shape our world. This one is about the absent father as well, but I think there's a little humor, well, the humor is certainly intended, and I hope you get it. You know a drink called Milo? That's a hot beverage? Okay, good. The other day, my grown and married daughter said to me, I sound like this because I have the flu. Daddy's on his way over here, but he might be at the supermarket now. I guess he's buying Milo. Milo, I asked. Yes, she said, chuckling. He buys me Milo whenever I'm sick. In fact, it doesn't matter what I'm sick with. A while ago, the weather changed. I got bronchitis, and he bought me Milo. He bought me Milo when they lost my papers, and I had to have that vaccine all over again. And the day they came and towed away Plym, and I cried. Her first car had finally died. Or when I've just had a bad day. In fact, I've got tins of it in my cupboard. And I think to myself, I might have saved a good deal of my marriage to this guy had I known. Back then I'd given him love, much talk and copious tears. When Milo, cups and cups of it might have done the job. Sweetheart, should you run out of room in your cupboard, keep the space in your heart open. That's what he's after. The other poems I'm going to read now are from my latest collection, Leaving Atlantis. These poems are all addressed to George Lamming. I think he might have taught some people here too. I'm not sure. George Lamming, you should know him, that I have addressed to him, written for him, about him. So I need not explain anything else about these poems, simply read them. This first one I'm reading is called Nexus. You wear your need for me like an affliction, some strange disease that overtook you unawares. This need is your undoing. This can't wait to hear her voice once more madness. Your frenzy that would force the hours to leap the too long days since seeing her and seeing her again. I am your loss of style, the sad cessation of your old war cry, pursuer never, always pursued. I am your dotage, your vulnerable season. This need defies your old philosophies, disputes your proven forms of reasoning. You swear sometimes I am your nemesis even. I fear the day, my love, and you should think this need a burden that you cannot bear. Be patient. Here is no sorcery, no duplicitous entanglement. The hand that guided me to you and you to me is stronger than my own. A higher wisdom precontrives the meeting of improbabilities. So anxious need, transformed by love, may rest at ease. I should tell you though that that's earlier, all right? So, okay. All right, this other one, when George actually, he had come to Brown and had left his Grundig, a German-made Grundig radio in my keeping. And this was a radio that he really, really loved. And I had it at my office one day at BCC Rain Tower. And to my amazement, I came in the next day and discovered that someone had come in and someone had actually stolen the radio. So here I am now having to explain to him what happened to this radio. So this is it's called Transition Radio. And on breaking the news that someone has stolen his German-made Grundig radio while in my keeping. Don't get vexed, love. Is you who praise Caliban for teething words from a European. Talk about battle for language, talk about struggle. You should see how small the spaces he come through. He take out Louvre, scale a wall, historic mission. So yes, he teeth the Grundig radio that you used to own. But think about all the language now in Caliban possession. All that learned discourse on global upheaval, the BBC World News, the latest book reviews. Pardon me, by now the thief must have sold the damn radio for just a few dollars. Well, when it comes to language, ain't you the one who see continuing possibility? Caliban just expanding his options. Is cultural emancipation, love? Is culture in transition? This one is called He Listens. He listens. That is a complaint that a lot of us women have, right? Okay. He listens. Searching his eyes, I venture only his small frailties at first. He smiles. Encouraged, I press on. He's sensitive, no doubting that ever again. This time he does not say that these are mere formalities. What these does he mean? My woes are not a matter of propriety. I question in more ways than one his failure to connect with me when I most need him to. My remonstrations do not make him flinch. What stoicism? None of the jitters or impatience of a younger man. But shouldn't he respond to me by now? I ask him, word master that he is, could he have missed the meaning of my simple language? Surely that's not a smile he's holding back. Surely he knows I'm serious. But no, his gaze is steady on my face, and for the next 10 minutes he's listening. At last I sink, grateful though spent, into his arms, and spy, under a pamphlet lying near, his hearing aid he'd placed discreetly on the chair. Okay. As someone describes at the end of this, Shara McCallan, I think, this collection has a lot to do with the whole idea of loss, of love and of loss, and the complexities involved. And these other poems pretty much have to do with that idea. Near distance. At last, the heart makes its way past sadness, regret, grows at ease with shadows that move like humble servants about the room, sweeping up words where they had fallen as dust motes, unconnected from anything we meant to say, brushing the edge off memory, turning it face downwards, tending its slow seepage into the daily habit of absence under one roof. The next poem is Courage. Just come to that. This night, while cricket song throbs in my veins like glad cymbals, and the frogs whistle, the winds sway, and the beating pulse are one. Tonight, while fireflies disarm the darkness, I can venture out to where you are. I carry within me the lamp burning at the kitchen table, the gaslight hovering over the old people's hymns packed with hope. This armor fits well and will not rub against my chafing heart. A brew of florfence and fitweed calms me. Tonight, with my mother's honest rawness at my back, her calling a spade nothing but what it was, I can run my finger along your contradictions and not flinch. Insight. This morning, the silence shakes this old armor off, makes room for the drift of voices. Can't you see, can't you see? And I do, after all this time. I see how you brought me this huge bowl of trust, and I caught it, so used to the weight of others. Did I let you down? Not in my faithfulness that is inviolate, nor in some battery of words, but in the web, the grain, the fine shading of you. Was I dreaming when you took your trust back? Yet give me one thread, and I'll find you again in this dawning. There's also mention of my faith. That is a very, very important part of my life. And these two poems have to do with that. Actually, I did not know that the original meaning of the term revolution apparently was a very peaceful one. It simply meant the harmonious turning of one thing around the other. So this one is called Revolution. Some of these things fell up, 42. Revolution. How to revolve harmoniously around a fixed point has always been our question. You with your Marxist stance, me with my love of Christ. You waged a patient war against my closed mind. Book after book informed me how a Marxist looked at Jesus. Symbolism, not the literal, was the enlightened approach. The world was mired in politics and fable. Again, how to resolve the question of the body. For you, the seat of pleasure. For me, however sweet its splendor, still the temple. Product of history and social formation, the sum total in your view of the human. I hold man is his dual nature, God-shaped, though flawed and prone to error. How are we now, years on from early tensions when we thought it worth our while to strive for common ground? I've opened the door much wider to your deity, reason, but find him shy of going beyond my mind. I've asked him, what is this essential loneliness? Why seek purpose and meaning? Why long for certainty, and what is the source of that longing? Why poetry? From what abyss does poetry spring, distilled, clearer than thought, multi-hued, each sense held in abeyance to its wonder? How does faith cast her upward beam and reconfigure stars? But more than all, reason remains dumbfounded when I ask him this: what is that greater love that makes me love you still? And then I'm going to read about 3 more poems. That's it. 3 more poems. Okay. Well, this one has to do with, George actually was awarded the ALBA award. I think that comes out of Cuba, etc. And I went to the celebration with him the night when they were actually presenting the award here, in Barbados. And I wrote this short poem, Night of the Alba. He had been addressing the audience. The audience sees you standing behind the podium, but I know you've long flattened the walls of the room. You've gone leaping across the Caribbean Sea. There you spin and toss the islands. Like a fuller's earth, you filter out the slag of insularity, the waste of creeping nationalism, until one shining stretch remains, one place with one foundation, one home named region. The crowd's applause signals your return. Oh, Captain, your sea legs are weary. You make your way towards me, grasp with both of yours the hand I'm holding out. You're anchored. After George came home to Barbados, I saw him go through a very, very difficult time because there was so much in terms of his dreams for Caribbean unity. That poem just mentioned it, referred to it. But there was so much in terms of his dream for Caribbean unity, which simply was not happening. And I suppose there were a lot of ways in which he was attempting to internalize this, and it was very difficult, but it was difficult for me too, because I was there being a part of it and witnessing it. This one is called Messenger. When evening after evening your anger, wordless, unassailable, stalks the corridor, wafts its odor through every room from floor to ceiling, I find myself listening for your real footfall, softer, softer, almost limping into the second shifting light. Where is your voice? That beam that cut the ear and eye of Antillean indifference. No more? This sound in the silence still surprises me. Triton's heart breaking, his conch shell laid aside, dusk gathering. One of the things that we all have to come to terms with is the fact that no matter how great and people are, there's this thing called mortality, and there is aging. And these 2 poems have to do with that. This one in particular, called Nursing Home. This is where he had to be very, very temporarily, because they had to leave Barbados, but then, so this was a temporary thing. But the first 3 lines are actually spoken by him, and then I wrote the rest of the poem that, was triggered by those 3 lines. Nursing Home. There'll be no greater light. It's dim as it should be. All is grim here. See how they've draped death across that chair, limbs hanging loosely, skin fresh as a newborn, except for the stillness, the gaze, it seems, sucked into the white wall. Silence quells the unexpected word, the odd chuckle. Only the night finds credence here, the painful cries, an anguish of unspoken loneliness. Philosopher, your chair now sits on wheels guided by a kind nurse. How can you bear to witness the fall of reason when the mind gives way, what is real trumps the imagination, and language knows no skill to counter the void? You speak of giving your books away as if to shed some weight. It is the season for light traveling when all is left at the gate. My final two poems. Badur, I think that you would, this poem, you probably want to use this for your thesis at some point. It does have to do with the idea of, well, you'll see. It's called A Precipitate Sorrow. I live too much in the now, the flame, the thunder of you. When you are gone, how often will I turn an evening silence into a rosary, coaxing the past with crystal beads, if only, if only. How will I unhear, untouch memory? How dilute your gaze, remove its essence like the year's varnish from all we loved? Perhaps the mystery dimmed now by the familiar will come again, and distance, the endless exile, will draw you closer beyond the feel of flesh. After months have passed, when it's only the wind and my fingers turning the pages, I'll read your conversations of age and innocence again. No longer your bright shadow over my shoulder, the lucent filter of your mind to clarify, expand, yet every message, each edict amplified by absence. I'm told I should ask all the questions now, record word and gesture, nuance and circumstance, as if time were mine to mediate, devise moment with meaning, arrange or label for future conveyors of history. And yet, I negotiate, make a dry run of tomorrow's grief against the long, slow hours when I shall wish my heart a palimpsest. And my final poem is one called Acceptance. From where I stand in the kitchen, I see your white hair slowly ascending the stairs and wonder if the nights are still unkind. What demons are waiting as you cross the landing, and how you combat them with your failing strength. Does your old weapon of reason still come to your rescue, or has time rusted its edge? These walls are now our mediation, our buffer against the contagion of words, our final surrender to a distance we cannot close. Such strange peace. Thank you.
Okay, the floor is open. Question, comments? Patrick?
What I love about sort of both of you, I'm going to borrow a very wonderful description, the notion of interiority. When listening to Esther and Kwame, two distinct voices, the gaze, one is inward going outward. It's as if there is a kind of meditative pivot, right, in terms of Esther's voice. And then Kwame is as if there is a circular, right, like a detective going around the body. So from exteriority to interiority, and then for you, Esther, it is interiority. So could you talk about that kind of process of the gaze, where you place sort of the imaginative poetics within the poems? Is it really outside and inside, and how do you contend with that kind of the way the poet sees?
Esther looks at me. Well, that's beautifully said. Poetry is really one of these peculiar things that allows us to sort of engage experience from sort of multiple perspectives and angles. And I think one is doing many things at the same time as one is writing. And the most consistent thing we're doing is failing to bring what is imagined, what is felt, what is carried into language. So the act of turning experience, feeling, thought, idea into language is already a sort of separation that is happening. So in that sense, we already separate, language separates us from sort of the interior experience. And then having tried to render it in language, I think we create something that is new, is different, but interesting in its own way. And therefore, how we engage it as the writer and how the reader or the listener engages it becomes another experience of engaging this idea of what is internal and what is external. So I think I can only say that poetry allows us to have these sort of multiple ways of engaging it. But we are all involved in an inadequacy. The inadequacy is the fundamental limitation of language. But it's a sweet journey anyway. I mean, even if it's a sweet failure to try and find the words to articulate and to sort of find a way to speak experience. And the last thing I'd say is that even the way I just described it presumes that there is a known interior. That is, that I know what I'm going to say before I attempt to say it. But that's not my experience as a poet. My experience as a poet is, as I'm writing, I'm discovering what I know. And then after writing, I then go, okay, so this is interesting. I had no idea. And who knows whether that, I mean, I know now that I know, but I didn't know that I knew, or didn't know what I knew, and didn't care to know what I knew until I started to write, because then now I have to deal with people reading it, so then it has to come up with something. So the writing process is a discovery process at the same time. So if that sounds really wonderfully strange and not helpful, I'll blame your question.
Yes, I agree with Kwame in that, for me, I focus a lot on the interior landscape. To me, that is what is more real than a whole lot that I see around me. And then is the challenge that I suppose T.S. Eliot throws up there, the objective correlative, that for every feeling that you may have in that interior, the challenge then, as Kwame pointed out, is to find something in the objective world which can bring that out, bring that to life, some metaphor, some image. That's the challenge. That's what I aim for. That's, I believe, perhaps what every poet aims for. What I find, though, for me, is that I hear the music of the poem before I write it. And that's a very difficult thing to explain. I can't tell you I heard it in that beat or that rhythm, but I hear it and feel it. And then the next thing is to be true to what I feel first. That's what I have to get on. That's what I have to get on the page. And I don't force it. I wait until it comes. And when it is there on the page, it is then I can, mess around in terms of the techniques and all that. But to get that interior music on the page, and then bring the rest, bring all the rest that I know of poetry, craft, and all that to bear on that. That's what I can tell you about my process.
Shamara, then Abedor.
Thank you guys so much for a beautiful reading. You both dealt with the question of reason versus faith, or the sort of conundrum. Oh, thank you. You both dealt with the theme of reason and faith, and I was specifically taken by your poem, Professor Dawes, African Postland, and the story of Solomon. And if you could talk a bit more about the sort of generative impulse behind that poem, and then how you were working through reason that you were coming with and the faith that was exhibited. And then for you, Professor Phillips, in terms of your poems Revolution and Messenger, the same question of how faith may inform the way you are able to transfer your thought into language.
Yeah, there's that line, you know, this Ghanaian youth who has seen the face of Jesus Christ, blah, 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 blah. Rasta is a very interesting thing for me because there's something very familiar about, you know, Rasta in a weird, not weird, but in a very clear way, was a source of comfort for me. I was never a Rastafarian, but I remember when I moved to Jamaica, I was about 10 years old and was at school, primary school in a school called Shortwood Practicing School, primary school there. And was teased relentlessly about being African. Like, it was so ridiculous how they teased you, the African. And Tarzan, meet Tarzan, you know, meet Tarzan. The African thing was rough, you know, and so our source of, the only way we could deal with it was to, we developed an acute sense of irony, which was helpful. We lied, and we lied in ways that were willfully evil, so we would then have elaborate stories about our meetings with Tarzan and Phantom, goes through walks, and we had pet lions at home. We really were uncomfortable in clothes, we preferred to go around naked. And nobody troubled me at school. Nobody would try to fight me because I'll just jump up on a desk and go, oh, the African. But it was traumatic. I mean, I'm just saying, it was traumatic. It was very disturbing and it was stupid because, you know, like, where do you think you came from? Like, what's all this about? So, but the one place, just down at the end of the street, just the driveway to the school, the guys used to sell orange and everything. That's what Rasta man used to sell peanuts and orange and thing. And apparently they heard I was from Africa. And I'll never forget them calling me to sit down and tell them about Africa. And they were genuine. They wanted to hear what food we ate, what the landscape was. And I was like Jesus among the Pharisees, preaching Africa. And the man take it in and were welcoming me. And it was a different experience from the African thing in school. And it really was a healing kind of thing. So in many ways, that and their recognition of they knew who Nkrumah was, they knew everything about the place I came from that was being sort of denigrated by my schoolmates and my teacher, who kept saying, you can't even talk proper. And what are you really doing here? But I mentioned that because that opened a lot of, so with reggae, with Rasta and so on, it made sense to me in a very interesting kind of way. But I treated it as a faith that I didn't cross into because I couldn't get with the Haile Selassie as God idea. But with greater thought about it, Rasta's narrative does not begin in 1938 and so on. It's a narrative that is an old narrative about the African diaspora. It's an old narrative about transforming belief into something into our image, into our sense of self. It is a narrative of reconstructing and sort of recapturing myths that are taken out of your culture and out of your world and seen as different from you. So in many ways, for me, Rasta as a recuperative gesture, and also as a radical gesture, changing the language and transforming it and testing it and deconstructing it and so on, makes complete sense to me, so I have a great affinity to it. But so working that against, it seemed like I'm working that against a faith, my Christian faith, which is something that I would develop much later on. Seems like a contradiction, but for me it's not a contradiction, but it's part of a kind of a spiritual sense that makes some kind of sense for me. But those tensions, the idea of the spirit, the idea of colonialism, the idea of imperialism and the related cultural imperialism and so on, and then the idea of faith in the midst of that, is a rich source of complexity. For me, I was telling Esther today about when my father rallied George Lamin and Kofi Owona to come talk to me because, at 18 I was now a Christian, and these guys came to me to like straighten me out because I said, this is not good. What are you going to do? I thought it's like I was joining a gang or something. I was going to kill people. And they worked hard, but then they just said, these children, you'll never know with them. But it's, for me, that's rich. That's a source of possibility for me. And the art of writing is about making sense of those seeming contradictions, but for me, that are not there.
Reason and faith. I would place that argument or that discussion within the context of George and myself. He being the Marxist, the intellectual, very much the man of reason, and I being the woman of faith. So you could just imagine what that relationship was like. But I think I've grown the richer for it because there are some questions that I've had to consider, had to ponder, things I've had to think about. But I suppose it's not everything I need to say now, but I have also been able to see with aging, with what could happen if there are certain props, if you like. I use the word very loosely, that are not there. You see, so that's something I want to give a lot more thought to before I speak much about it. But yes, it has been a very interesting journey, this whole matter of reason and faith.
Thank you both for your readings. My question is for both of you, though it's inspired by, I'll give the background story. So this past spring, Professor Bose taught a Caribbean literature course. He had the pleasure of leading 7 Black women in a Caribbean literature course, and he's laughing now. And we read The Stone Gatherer. And when you gave your guest lecture, you were describing the way that you were using love in your poetry is one that situates love as forgiveness. After that point, the course completely changed. It became a course about figuring out how to find love within this understanding of coloniality and with the sort of residuals and reimagining and retooling of colonial subject positions. And so I'm wondering if you still maintain that love, at least in your work, is about forgiveness, because later on in the course we said, there's no such thing as love in the Caribbean, and there were 2 camps, and there were 2 teams. There was one team that said love doesn't exist in the Caribbean, and then the other team said love only exists in the Caribbean. How do you know? How do you mean? So, number 1, do you still believe that love in your own work is represented as forgiveness? And 2, do you think that there is a language of love that exists in the current moment, considering the way that colonialism has impacted not only how people understand masculinity and femininity, but the way that intimacy develops and
That sounds as if I need about 3 or 4 lectures to deal with that. But I remember Lorna Goodison. You must know about Lorna Goodison, yeah. She came to give a talk in Barbados once. It was at the Frank Cullimore Awards ceremony. And she made a very interesting point. She said, very often her students say to her, but Professor Goodison, doesn't anything good ever happen in the Caribbean? Are people always cruel? I mean, and she because remember that historically we came out of a background of tremendous cruelty, fragmentation, disruption, violence, the whole lot. And it's part of at least the beginning of the Caribbean psyche, if you want to put it that way. But, and she actually made a plea, which I was a little bit surprised about, because you really can't tell people what to write about. But, well, it was her night to speak anyhow. She could say whatever she wanted to say. But she actually made a plea. She said, I really would like to see Caribbean writers being more positive, saying something more about, that good things are possible, that every parent-child relationship doesn't have to be horrible and there's going to be a lot of brutality, etc., etc. But when you talk about love, I believe that, in fact, I know that love is very possible in spite of the things that we've come through. I think, for example, of my grandmother. I think there's a poem in there, A Kind Covering. I don't know if you would have read that. But I think of all the gestures, all the things that they did which showed such love. I still remember coming home when it was raining and my grandmother coming to meet us from primary school and bringing whatever jackets and coats, whatever she could find, and leading us home because she didn't want us to get soaked, and and all the things we talk about or something, all the things she would do that she didn't say verbally I love you, but she did show a tremendous amount of love. I think there's always been that parallel existence, that whereas you have the deprivation, the violence, people still having to learn how to express love, that has always been there. I also think, if you want to know my personal viewpoint, is that forgiveness is very necessary. A lot of the ways of seeing and thinking nowadays, a lot of those have to do very much with the self. What's in it for me, and what I can get out of it, and I. But I really do believe that, there are those spiritual values that matter. Forgiveness it's not always easy, but it is necessary if we are going to be whole people. So yes, I believe that there's love, and I believe in forgiveness and all the other wonderful things that we still hold. I know you mentioned that, but I wonder I have reason to think, but Kwame has shown me that is not true. But I wonder sometimes if remaining in the Caribbean might make it a little bit easier, perhaps, to retain, if you like, a kind of innocence. I know that's a little bit extreme, but where you're not, if you know what I mean, Kwame, it might be easier then to hold on to things like faith and certain kinds of values because they're not constantly, battered by the metropolitan way of thinking, the bigger world, how the bigger world sees things, and you don't have to feel that you've got to fall into all that sophisticated claptrap that people come up with. That to me is a very false way of living.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question. Can each of you talk a little bit? Yeah, can each of you talk a little bit about honesty in poetry, not as a matter of temperament, but of the craft itself?
Honesty in poetry in terms of craft?
Yeah, you're right. Not as a matter of sort of personal temperament, but the idea of honesty as a part of the craft of poetry itself. Your thoughts on that?
Well, for me, I can't help but write honest poetry because I don't know what other kind to write. And for me, therefore, the craft, I just find a way to, how best can I craft it? How can I shift it? For me, crafting has a lot to do with how then, once that truth, as I see it, as I feel it, is on there, then what are the techniques in terms of crafting that will make that truth clearer? So therefore, I'm careful about, I'll choose one word over the other, I'll end a line perhaps one place rather than another one. The metaphors I choose, I wait to see, is this thing working or is it not? Is it too much over the top? Is it, So that for me, feeling and crafting, those are two things that pretty much work together for me.
It's an interesting, there's an interesting thing that comes to mind when I think of that idea of honesty, and it has to be predicated on the idea that the poet, the sort of contemporary poetic voice, the voice of the poet, has some correlation with the spoken language of the poet, a kind of sincerity of language and integrity of language. That when you write poetry, you're writing a heightened form of what is spoken. But in the heightening, it does not undermine the integrity, the kind of integrity of what is spoken. And so the only way I understand this issue is just experientially, what I experienced. I wrote for many years, and I was, praised for the poetry and so on, but I always felt I was faking it. That there was something highly self-conscious and something that had no, that was affect. It was outside of me. I was doing it well, but I was faking it, and there was nothing at stake. And I don't know whether that was language or that was subject or what it was, but there was some distance between me and the work, so that I was embarrassed by the work, or I did not believe how the work was valued. Something changes when there's a moment when there's a poem that I write, which is not necessarily a remarkable poem, but there's something that happened with the use of the language and the way in which I was writing that poem that made me suddenly trust the poem. In other words, I trusted that this was as true an articulation of where I am, or what I'm thinking, or what I'm feeling, as I can achieve. When that moment happened, I think it changed my relationship with what I was writing. Something clicked in that moment. Who knows whether that is a universal experience of everybody, but for me, this was the moment. It had to do with my relationship with what I was writing. And it was a kind of integrity, a kind of truth, but also an honesty of language. So if I tie that, but it, so when we think of, the question about love, I was thinking about it too, because I don't know how the other side, I mean, you said there were two sides.
I was on the anti-love side.
Yeah, so how you can come up with that? Like the Caribbean God love? I'm fascinated by the capacity to imagine that. Like how you guys would come up with that and actually like continue living in the world. You know?
Oh, you're asking?
No, I'm not really. But so because I remember when we used to sit in a government yard in Trenchtown, observing the hypocrites as they would mingle with the good people we meet, good friends we had, and good friends we lost along the way. In this great future, you can't forget your past, so dry your tears, I say. I remember when we used to sit in a government yard in Trenchtown, and Georgia would make the fire. It was log wood burning through the night. Then we'll cook cornmeal porridge, of which I'll share with you. In this great future, my feet is my only carriage. So I've got to push on through. And when I'm gone, everything is going to be all right. You said I don't love it? You want me to quote Gregory Isaac? Quote nurse, night nurse. No love?
One quick thing, can I say one quick thing though, that's Colin, right?
Yeah.
That's good. One quick thing that I would say in terms of the integrity of a poem, I'm not sure if it's where your mind is going, but there is a time at which the poem takes itself over. All right? I can't explain it, Kwame knows what I mean. Something happens where the poem takes over, but even in that, it still retains its own integrity. Right.
Wonder?
I just wonder, Kwame, you said that the there came a moment, a poem, a period when you were writing, and perhaps even a particular poem, and something about your relationship to the language, and that in that moment, you felt that you had reached a level of honesty and truth and integrity that perhaps had not been there in the past. My question then is, how far into a writing life were you? How old were you? How long had you been doing this when that moment came for you?
Well, it was a very specific moment. I was what, 28, 29? I've been writing poetry for a while, but I've been writing plays, and I was very comfortable with the plays, but the poetry I wasn't comfortable. I hadn't published a book, and that was why, because I didn't trust what I was doing. But it's a longer story. It's a story of being tutored by reading and wrestling with other poets. I was reading a lot of poets. Reading my father's work was a turning point for me, because in a weird kind of way, I could watch his progression. These were unpublished work, and so I could watch his progression, and I could begin to see patterns that made sense. I was seeing a poet's poetic journey of making the poet from the inside, from the bad drafts, rather than from the position of the finished work. So there was a way in which having access to that narrative and that development was useful to me, a kind of tutoring, a kind of learning. And then the poem was a poem called Acceptance Revisited, which was a response to a poem that my father had written. And I think that point of that conversation and what was at stake in that conversation opened the gates for a kind of urgency of articulation. Before that, I was imitating, and happy to imitate, but not necessarily trusting both the content or even the capacity of my language at that point. Now, it may not be apparent to anybody. So this is a very personal moment for me. It's not somebody may say, well, I saw that's a nice poem, and I'll say, well, it's kind of nice, but I didn't like it, but that was me. But something turned in that moment, and really, it literally did turn in that moment. And after that, I kind of have a great sense of knowing when I'm faking it, and when I'm not. I know when I'm failing, but that's a different thing. But when it's an affect, when it's a pretense. But again, I'm speaking here not as a kind of generic narrative that works for everybody, but this was my own experience.
Can we take one more question?
So, I wanted to
Martha,
know.
you wanted to?
I wanted to know about Mr. Doss, your experience of your relatives in Ghana, hearing the things that they would tell you, as a child, and hearing their voices, their accent, the music of that, Ghanaian language that they spoke. How did that translate into, when you started to write your poetry? Were you looking at that and comparing it with the Jamaican accent, or were you, doing sort of like in your head, having like these two languages going?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think I was talking about, I had to learn Patois. So I knew Patois was a language. You don't know it's a language. When you grow up with it, it's a dialect, you're just doing a thing, and everybody talk funny, or them talk bad, or them broken English. Or no, if you have to learn it, then you realize it have a syntax. There's a right way and a wrong way. You learn, and I had to learn Patois, because when I came to Jamaica, I did not have Patois. I could speak Pidgin, but I couldn't speak Patois. My first 2 weeks in school were disastrous for me. I didn't know what these people were saying. I couldn't understand anything. The teacher, I couldn't understand. So I had to learn it. And I remember sitting down, as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old saying, no, minago. That worked. No, minago. All right, that worked. And I I remember learning it and practicing it so I don't sound stupid when I'm talking to people. So I had to learn it. And it's interesting because learning Patois and then writing in Patois and gave me a kind of relationship to that language. And it was fantastic because it was an entryway. If you learned it, the doors open to all kinds of things, all kinds of worlds and possibilities. So yeah, language is a very big part of my development. I don't think, it took me years, I can tell you, it took me years to feel comfortable, relatively comfortable to say I'm fluent. And all it takes is that if you speak Patois in Kingston and then one day you happen to go to St. Elizabeth, you realize you're out of it. You really never know. It's a whole different language and things like that. So there's a great part of that thing. But my problem was complicated because while a child in Ghana, I was speaking Fanti and Ewe and all of this, but I lost it very soon in Jamaica because nobody to talk to. So when I went back to Ghana, I was rejected as, oh, Bronio, you don't even speak your own language. Go back to the white people. So there I was rejected. In Jamaica, I was rejected. So it was really, like, I've been through such trauma, you know? No, I'm just kidding. It wasn't that bad. But it's true. I mean, so you're in this peculiar space. But for me, it's enriching. I mean, this is the great thing. And I grew up in a Pan-African home. Pan-Africanism was the culture I grew up in. So I don't have a divided self and all that kind of. I really don't. I don't struggle with that. I get vexed. Bocas won't allow me to enter their country. I'm not Caribbean enough. I'm born terms. And all these kind of situations. Yeah, it's true. Can you believe it? I'm not Caribbean enough. Yeah, you know the reason. Really. And I've said it publicly, but you know it.
Okay, can I ask a quick question? I was intrigued by your explanations for why that particular poem wasn't directed at your wife.
My wife, you know. She wouldn't find that funny.
What struck me was and correct me if I'm completely wrong, but was a hesitancy of engaging in a personal sphere in a way in which didn't happen with Esther's poems. Esther's poems flowed out of a personal space. And the question I really want to ask is, what are the silences that are forced upon a poet, even when one is trying to be, as Collins suggested, honest?
Yeah.
You're trying to be honest, you're trying to find an honest voice, but there are silences. How do you negotiate? What are those silences? How do you negotiate?
It's a great question, and I think Esther wrestled with that. I mean, had to wrestle with that issue. Silence is, but it's funny. I think I'm as open about my life in my poetry as I am about it in my life. You understand what I mean? And what is at stake, it's really about me, but it's about the other people that can be affected by what I say. I cannot own my own narrative because other people are affected by my narrative. And so consequently, I feel, now there's a school of thinking that says, it's your story, even if you control that and you can tell it how you want and it doesn't matter what they think. But I don't have that view. I have the view that I live with people and therefore, if necessary, I have to get permission from them. So when my book, Impossible Flying, which are poems sort of engaging my younger brother who struggled with mental illness. Before I published that collection, which was ready to go, I told Jeremy Peopletree that I'm not publishing it until my family reads it and they tell me it's cool. And if they want to take out poems, they have to come out, including my brother. And if they don't want it to go out there, then I'm not doing it. But that, I don't tell everybody that that's what they must do, but that's what I can live with. You understand what I'm saying? And I also know that, well, my view is that I can't write down a poem. I mean, like, you know, I write poems all the time. So if I throw it 60 poems, that's not the end of my world. I mean, I can write 60 more poems tomorrow. So, literally. So I don't feel, but I feel that as part of the struggle of it. So, but I also think that fact and truth are not necessarily the same thing. Right? You can keep out the fact, but there's a great truth that is being told that is very vulnerable and very important. And the facts themselves are not necessarily as critical as we imagine them to be.
And what I would say, Kwame is quite right. Kwame knows the struggle I had to put this out, because he will tell you when I first sent it into People Tree, I sent it in these poems here along with other poems, because I did not want to, you know, I really struggled, and the question was, should I show, I didn't think I should send them in as this particular collection without showing them to George. And just let me say that all this talk that I have out here, believe you me, if I have to go to, when I am in Barbados, I'm going to have to be much more careful with what I say. Barbados is a small place. So I know what you mean, because I remember how shocked I was once when I wrote one of my, what I call my father poems. And one of my sisters got extremely upset. She said, why should other people know more about my father than I do? It had never once occurred to me, because that, as far as I'm concerned, is my story that I'm telling. So yeah, there are those considerations, you know, how, because I don't want to write anything other than what I feel, but I'm aware that other people could be affected by it. How do you do, what do you do to find the balance? My consolation always has been that as a writer himself, as an artist, George would know that he cannot or should not try to impose on me what I write, you know. So, but I am very much aware of trying to find that balance between what is honest and real and how this could affect other people.
Can we give both of our